Good afternoon. This is Professor Aman Dean with Critical Talk. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to speak with two people who are across the pond. Their opinion of us, they kind of know our opinion of them, which is none because we don't know anything, but we're going to learn some things tonight. Here, even though it was telecast about Brexit, I don't think many Americans had a clue. And most because it was probably explained by our news anchors, which is no surprise either. So we're going to get some information on that. My two guests are Globetrotters and have spent some time on the continent, moving through a couple of places. And I really want to look at what's happening there. We also want to talk about how they see all of the things that are happening here. Is their prime minister doing something different? I thought that having COVID would have tapped him down, but then I read today that he's doing something extraordinary by wanting to give everybody a virus test. And what are people thinking about that? So let me introduce you to our guests this evening. One is Andy Reid, is a fisherman from England who is an assistant chief executive of the National Fisheries Federation, represented the fishing industry at national and international levels. He works closely with politicians on a bipartisan basis. We don't know that word here in America. Bipartisan has lost all meaning. He has spent the last 2 decades as a natural resource policy advisor, initially as a director general within the Isle of Man. And I'll ask them, I saw that in a movie I was watching, but we're going to figure out what the Isle of Man is government. And lately, as a ministerial advisor in several African nations, second through the United Nations and European Union. Secondly, we have Rosie Khan, who is an international development professional with a master's from Johns Hopkins here in the US, SAIS, and 15 years experience. She most recently worked with the UN in Somalia and Pakistan, in Paris with the OECD, and now works for an international NGO in London. Her areas of expertise are food security, livelihoods, and social protection. That's the scope will give me enough to talk about forever. So, first of all, let me welcome you all to Critical Talk.
Thank you.
Critical Talk for Ruby, who has been in the United States for a great deal of her time, is an extension of Radio Islam. It's Radio Islam in video form, and it is now Muslim Network TV. We're also going to use this program to build bridges between us and you guys over there. It doesn't make any sense that I don't have any news. Let me begin with Andy. When you say, when you're talking about, let me go back before that. You gave me an education. Tell us the difference between Britain and England.
England is part of Britain. The full title is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. If you look on a map, you'll see the British Isles is Great Britain, and it's not because we were great in the past. It's the large island, and the large island has 3 nations on it: England, Scotland, and Wales. And we then conquered Ireland. Initially, England conquered Wales in the 1200s, Scotland in the 1700s. Ireland, we fought for a long, long time and just about conquered it, created the United Kingdom. And theoretically, we are 4 nations who've signed our own agreement to be a single nation with a single House of Parliament. There's been some devolution There's a lot of talk about breaking the kingdom up, but at the moment, nationally or in international law, the UK is a single country, basically split into, in a US analogy, 4 states. But within those 4 states, it's like we have Montana. It's like we have Montana, Wyoming, California, and New York, and you know who's in charge.
Yeah, California and the biggest piece. The biggest pieces are always in charge. So, school us a little bit about what Brexit was all about. I mean, I remember being in Heathrow and going into a London shop, not because I knew it was a London shop, but mostly because the people in there had English I could almost understand. And I saw something I wanted. And I pull out these euros. And the man said, oh, no, 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 no. We do, and I can't say it with the right accent, of course, but it was, we do pounds sterling. And I'm saying, what the hell is a pound sterling? And isn't everybody supposed to use euros? And the man was just looking at me like I had lost my mind forever. So what was Britain ever in the European Union for real?
There are 2 levels of integration. There's the membership of the European Union, which encompasses all the states in Western Europe now, other than Switzerland. And there's the monetary union, which is a smaller club with much tighter fiscal rules. So the UK was a member of the EU, but not a member of what's called the Eurozone. All the ex-Iron Curtain countries, Eastern Bloc, are not members of the euro. Their currencies are not thought stable enough. A couple of other Western countries stayed out, Sweden in particular. But that didn't mean we weren't members of the European Union.
So what we over here thought of as the UK, the European Union, as being this block of nations who had done something unheard of and had come together, and they were going to be a unity and really friendly and loving each other, was only partially true.
It's been hugely, it was set up after the Second World War to stop the next war, to stop European nations fighting. And in that, it's been hugely successful. Britain's never quite fell part of the club. Economically, it's been hugely successful. But politically, the message never really got across to sections of the UK. And it was very easy for politicians to blame the EU for domestic issues, which is really where a lot of the vote to pull out came from.
So with almost no borders across the UK and immigrants fleeing countries on the continent, did that make it easier for them to get into Europe? And once into Europe, to challenge, along with people coming from Eastern Europe, the trades in the UK?
Immigration was a huge factor in the no vote, in the leave vote. And there was two types of immigration. As you rightly bring up, there was a huge influx of Eastern Europeans who were coming over here to undertake jobs that largely couldn't be filled. I think the equivalent of Latin American workers coming north in the States, farm jobs, manual labor, the kind of jobs you couldn't get anyone to fill. We had a huge flood of immigrants, and we're normally a fairly welcoming country. But when something like 5% of the population in 2 years is immigrants, it can create some difficulties. Then the second immigration issue was the overland immigration through the European Union of economic or political refugees wanting to come to the UK because they see it as they speak English, if they speak any second language, and they see it as the place to come. And the view of that group of Brexit voters would be the Europeans are helping them along to get to the channel to flood our country, to stop them staying in their places. and that the two of those combined to a fairly intolerant and aggressive attitude that hasn't existed in the UK for 30, 40 years. It's quite depressing.
Like the U.S., really. How do you see the issues of immigration and this flooding and Brexit and those things?
Very, very similar, and it's the same demographic who kind of switched allegiance. The old white working class feeling threatened, taken for granted by the Labour Party, our equivalent of Democrats, taken for granted, who suddenly switched sides in huge numbers because they didn't like change. It hadn't been explained to them, and their vote was taken for granted. And this is what has propelled the new politics we have in the UK.
Wow. Is it the same politics that we have in the US? Ruby, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think in some ways it is. I think it's a bit different. The UK's relationship with the European Union, they preserved their currency, so they weren't part of the economic union. In terms of the US, we did have NAFTA, which was the kind of the trade area with Central America. So in some ways it was distinct, but there are a lot of similarities. It's not exactly the same, but it's definitely a lot of similarities that you can see.
Well, what about the issues with the immigrants? Because, back in the day when Britain, I think I got it right, considered itself a true empire, it had an empire. And people didn't need visas to come, and lots of folks came. They fought in behalf of Britain in some of Britain's further conquests. So immigrants have always been there. Andy is shaking his head like he didn't know I knew that much, but that's okay, Andy. But you know what I'm saying? Is that the same kind of immigration issues that have been brought to the fore? And they've always been here in the US, but they really were brought to the fore under Donald Trump.
I mean, I think the way that it's been politicized and the way that it mobilizes this national identity is very similar in both contexts, in the UK as well as the US. It becomes that kind of hot button issue. It's a very easy kind of response, and it's a really interesting way how parties are polarized in the sense that they there's two very distinct views, and they end up being very conflictual in that sense. So I do think that definitely is a similarity. I think probably the human rights violations in America are much greater. They're much more televised, more public. They may not be as evident in the UK, and probably not as widespread. I think it's much worse in the US. Particularly
to hold those thoughts. We're going to take a short break and then come back, and I want to explore that just a little more, because I want to get behind the relationship to having a national identity and conflict with diversity, multiculturalism, and all of those, interesting terms, which I don't know what they mean anymore, because they get all conflated. So we're going to take a quick break. Think about that. Stay awake, even though you're 9 hours ahead of me. Drink coffee, and we'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back. Wake up. Turn on those mics. We have a question. And I want to kind of roll this into the question I left you with. If the UK was welcoming for 40 years or so, why the sudden change? Where did this xenophobia, I hate those phobia names. They always sound terrible. And it is terrible, but nevertheless, come from in recent history? Either one of you.
I think it's numbers. It's partly numbers, it's partly coverage. And there's been waves of anti-immigrant expression. You can go back 500 years, and the comments have been there. The normal pattern has been absorption very quickly. What seems to have happened in the last decade is just the sheer numbers and this continuing media portrayal as well about the thousands at the gate who are waiting to push in. And I think you have something very similar about your southern border, but we have it about the Channel. The millions waiting. If we let one in, there'll be 10 million coming in.
Well, let me ask you a question. So you may want to take a sip of your tea, because all y'all drink is tea. Y'all can send me some tea, by the way. Great tea. Anyway, you guys, and I'm saying you guys just because you're a guy and you're sitting there with this accent, okay? Not you personally. Went out and tried to conquer the world. Didn't you ever expect the world to hit you up later?
Does any conqueror? I mean, we're one of many.
Probably not. But I mean, good. If you have policies of, if you were a part of the empire, you can come in and you can work. You didn't expect people to come?
No, and they were initially welcomed, absolutely. And there's still
okay.
So I'm going to wait for Ruby to contradict me, but there's still a kind of feeling that if you're part of empire, you respect the Queen, you respect our culture.
Why?
It's
You
okay.
colonize me. Why would I give you all of that? I'm messing. Don't go away.
And I mean aspects of that. If you go out for, you don't go out for an English. If you're in England, you go out for an Indian takeaway.
I know.
You know that there are elements that we've embraced quite happily. I think that this latest rash of anti-immigrant feeling is fueled by numbers and a feeling this is not people who understand British culture, and for British, let's forget that, it's English really, for all we call it British.
Okay. This English culture that people don't understand. I mean, they served you all in India. What about you don't they know?
I think that this new anti-immigrant feeling is mainly against immigrants coming either from Eastern Europe or from Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, places that don't have a history with the UK, and this is part of it.
So So,
Sorry, and finally, there's another part of it
okay,
which is
go
just
ahead.
purely anti-Islam. To be quite honest, there's a fear of Islam that is not there with immigrants from other countries or other cultures.
So the Anglican fear the Muslims.
Less likely to integrate. That would be the view of. If you're a West Indian Christian, you'll come to the same church as me. You'll play cricket with me.
Who wants to?
I might not like your food, but I'll get to know you. If you're Islam, you're part of that shadowy threat I don't really understand, and you're less likely to meet with me. I can't talk to your women. You won't come to the pub with me. And there's a kind of undercurrent. There's an undercurrent of fear, I think. This is not me, obviously,
I
but
know.
this is a view.
Okay. So
Can I also butt in here?
please, butt in, please.
I think it's a bit of a history of things too. Also, you talked a little bit about immigrants before. There are certain communities that have done a better job of, let's say, integrating, quote unquote, and other communities that are a bit more insular. They don't necessarily learn the language and things, and so they're viewed as a bit, with the less integrated. There are certain ethnic communities that do that. In addition, I think this kind of fear and fear mongering that's occurred there's a parallel with kind of the bombings that happen in London,
Right.
the subway bombings, and then the kind of the fanning of the flames by media as well. There are a whole array of newspapers that have different viewpoints that bring out some of these, polarizing elements. And then I think in the recent couple years, the Syrian conflict and this, kind of these women and young women and young men who went off to Syria, that were UK citizens, and they were fighting with ISIS and things like that. So there were some, several cases that came through. And so the way that all the collective kind of things happened together, and then, it was how it was exploited. I think these are kind of the ways it kind of sticks in people's minds in terms of why they should close the borders and not allow, people to come in, particularly if they don't know who they are, and places like, Afghanistan, for Syria, Middle East, they're going to infiltrate us and, attack us and things like that. So there's a lot of fear around that.
But even with the fears, I think the bombing was in 2005, if the little bit of memory I have left serves me. The English did not treat it the same way it would have been treated here in the United States. I mean, we would have gone to war, with whom I have no clue, but we would have been ramping up the army to be in the streets. There in London, they seem to immediately go after who it was that perpetrated. You know what I'm saying? They weren't holding up every house. They weren't detaining and deporting everybody, which has happened here in communities. What's the difference in the attitude? I mean, the British, are they the British? I keep messing it up, don't I? The police don't even have guns. I mean, they got billy clubs. And I said, I would never want to grow up to be a policeman there. But that's only because of my American. Our policemen now have AK-47s as personal weaponry. So it becomes, there's something about a society which can rule people without the use of deadly force, although people can have knives. But there was a difference in the treating of a terrorist attack that was so clear. Here it was a ramping up of the news to see this is why we need to have this, that, and the other. But there was no talk about the differences in how the nations handle stuff. Why was that? Click on Andy.
I can't answer that fully. I mean, you're quite right. After the bomb attacks, we've elected a Pakistani Muslim mayor of London. People, I think, don't see the next door neighbour as an issue. It's more the big picture. So a lot of these people who would have voted on an immigration issue over Brexit have got no personal vendetta or no personal experience. It's more a fear of the big picture. It's someone in a northern town who's never come across any of this who thinks it's a threat. So none, and there's always the exception. So none of it's personalised. Certainly, it's like, oh, it's not the Pakistani family next door. They're lovely. It's just the faceless ones that I've read about in the media who are as a threat. So at personal level, it's still really quite. I wait for Ruby to say something different, but it's really still quite welcoming and tolerant at face-to-face level. It's the sort of the big picture and this myth about what's happening elsewhere that people were concerned about.
Ruby, are you gonna say something different?
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I think I think I do agree that it is the fear of the unknown, and and then also seeing, different wars going on in different places, and then I also think that just what really stuck in the mind of people is the big migrant movement that came through Europe. They broke through Eastern Europe, went through Germany. Germany accepted them, and then it was a flood of people coming in.
Listen,
those types of
adjectives, a flood. They broke through. What are they, fish? Anyway, go ahead.
No, but I mean, it's just that it's that image, this kind of perception of things, what was happening. And so then I think it captured the imagination of people, and so I think that's kind of stuck with people, and it's shaped the narrative and the perceptions, and actually what the media has also talked about and what they've latched onto in terms of different conservative media, nationalist media, and playing up people's fears.
Okay, I want to just take a moment to begin the conversation. What you see happening on the continent. Most recently, and it's not because I know that you were there, but the Malian, oh my God, the man was in power way before I was born. That's just a euphemism. But it seems like he had been in power forever, as have the leaders of many of the African nations. And unjust, unfit, what did you see on the ground? Why are the conditions we perceive as untenable? I mean, we hear, and I think it's a Netflix series, Bill Gates is going to build sewage plants somewhere or the other, for places that don't have water. And you're sitting back saying, but this is 2020. Why are they just getting around to building something? But then again, why did Bill Gates have to go build it? What is wrong with these leaders? Are the citizens exploding? What's going on? Either one of you. Rock, paper, scissors.
Things are quite bad, in some places like Somalia, who have suffered, they've suffered 30 years of war. They are slowly getting better. They came out of 30 years of civil war and, started rebuilding, physically rebuilding, and then also rebuilding, kind of government and systems and things. In places like that, there is definitely a lot of work to do. Yes, there's a lot of corruption. there's a lot of graft, there's a lot of bribery and things like that. And in many cases, the US and the UK are still putting money into these places, which seems like a bottomless pit in some ways, but you know, you do see progress. I was there 6 years working on Somalia for 6 years, and so you did see progress in those 6 years. It's slow, and there's still conflict going on, but you know, it is. I don't know what it takes to change. Maybe accountability. Citizens can hold their leaders accountable, but it's still a long way. There's still a long way to go.
Well, you know, given what you just said, 30 years, right? Now, if you're the second or third generation, or well, second, born into this pattern, is that what Andy is talking about? That understanding English culture is far away. If you're used to paying a bribe for everything, if you're used to having to just survive. How do you live in London or one of those other places that's around London? You can tell I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? That's a cultural clash. And I don't suspect that the English have a way of acclimating you to now you're here and we do this way. Or do they? Would you turn on your mic? There you go.
Yeah. Well, my experience of Africans coming to the UK is they acclimatise very quickly to the fact that you can't bribe and you have to work hard to make money. And in Sierra Leone, it was quite interesting. The only middle class Sierra Leoneans were emigrants who were returning to the country with money to invest in small businesses. So that's not the issue. The issue I've personally seen is you're born with nothing. You accept that you have nothing, and if you claw yourself up, you want to stop anyone else coming up behind you.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of pride almost. I was working in Liberia where one of the ministers I was working with was caught with his hands in the till. I mean, big time, millions.
Oh, like
and I went to work in the morning. I went to work in the morning expecting the staff to be really angry. This is staff on $300 a month, which is a good salary in Liberia. $10 a day, and $10 a day you're fine. You know, you can pay your rent, you can eat food. I thought they'd be hugely angry, and they were all jealous. Oh, if I get promoted, I'm going to do the same too. And they were kind of admiring him. It is an entirely different culture.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's prevalent everywhere.
Right.
And one of the issues, I think Ruby mentioned it, is most of the income of government isn't from the people.
Right.
People are poor. So you get money from natural resources and from donors. So you don't need the consent of the people to rule them because they're not paying the taxes. They won't withhold the taxes because they're already not paying. They're paying in different ways. The despot will own the telecoms firm, so you're paying in phone charges. But there isn't this taxation base, so there isn't the kind of the need for consent to be in charge. And I think that's one element. And I'm waiting for Ruby to disagree or for you, but that's certainly one thing I've seen.
No,
I find it remarkable how quick the Africans I've worked with abroad have come to the UK and understood and fitted in very, very quickly with this is how it works in this country.
I think that there's on the part of the UK folk that they are going to bring this culture that they've heard about with them. I want to return to this. We have to take another break. And Ruby, I want to explore an article that you sent me, and I think you said the name of the place was Bristol. Was that correct?
The article wasn't about Bristol, but Bristol was a very important in this discussion of what's going on here.
Okay, that's what I want to come to when we come back. Thank you. Take a sip of water and tea.
Assalamualaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
Welcome back. Now I want to talk about this article that you sent me. Would you introduce the article and what's happening in that place and who that woman was?
The article I sent you was from The Guardian, and it's by a columnist whose name is Afua Hirsch. She's actually quite well known here. And I won't necessarily talk about the article, but she's an important figure in terms of talking about race relations in the UK. And so I had sent it to you to kind of flag that. But what I was talking about earlier was, and particularly when we talked last night, was about Bristol and kind of what the events that transpired in Bristol during the Black Lives Movement protests that were going on there. Was really kind of telling about race relations in the UK. Bristol, as Andy explained earlier, was one of the ports where a lot of the slave ships left, and it was very, very wealthy because the patrons there were profiting from the slave trade. So actually, many of the sites around Bristol are named after very famous kind of founder of Bristol, and he's also a slave trader, and so a lot of the African British populations there within the councils and the kind of local networks were trying to get the names changed because it was an affront to them, to their community, their history. So what happened during the Black Lives Movement, things transpired and they took down the statue of the slave trader, who's kind of in a major square, and dumped him in the river. So that was a really, really...
I didn't know.
Yeah, they were...
Okay.
Yeah, so it was very, very symbolic. I think people didn't... not everybody agreed with the way the statue is vandalized and then thrown into the river, but it was quite a kind of a touch point. But it looked at, really, it was kind of that moment where the momentum took over. And during the Black Lives Movement, there were numerous protests throughout the country, and then also it caused a lot of maybe like stock taking, kind of in the private sector and the media and all of these places, and people started looking kind of to themselves and reaching out to their Black colleagues and friends and just really kind of doing some soul searching, basically.
So do you think what we're facing here in the United States, and actually it was quite quickly, but as you mentioned earlier, the things that happened here were egregious. You know, a man is shot 7 times in the back. Another one dies because a cop has his knee on his neck. A woman is in bed and the police shoot through the door to kill her on a no-knock warrant. You know, all of those kinds of things. But what it has spurred rather quickly, you know, was a vigilantism. Now, I know in Germany, for example, the right, and in France, they have moved to, I don't know, protect property, to stand up against Black Lives Matter movement or any protest. Has the same thing happened there? The vigilantism.
Not to the same extent and not in the same militant way.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had 1 or 2 isolated individuals. We've had a few marches. The marches are normally overwhelmed by counter protests.
Oh, okay.
And the vigilantes, we don't have guns. There are no handguns in the UK at all. So that element of threat's removed. So if people come, they come with their fists rather than with anything else. It's there, but it's not very strong, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it'll get stronger? Do you think it'll get stronger?
Not. I hope not. Let's see what happens. At the moment, I'd say that feeling and that anger is more channeled against the European Union amongst that group rather than against Black Lives Matter. Again, Ruby might have a different view of this, but certainly, and to go back to the Bristol thing, most people found it amazing when we heard that this slave trader had his statue up there for years, and it wasn't removed violently. It was graffitied quite elegantly, and the mayor of Bristol, who is descendant of himself from West Indian slaves, has actually had the statue retrieved, and it's going to be put in a museum with the graffiti intact as a cultural piece, which I think is quite appropriate.
You think it's appropriate, Ruby?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just a moment in history, and it's about addressing history. So I do think that there was a lot of kind of things said, we support Black Lives Matters, and people, had symbols up and took part in the protests, but I'm not sure a real change is going to happen here in the UK. Why I say this is there is a Premier League football player that has done a very important campaign for school lunches for kids during the COVID lockdown over the summer, because a lot of these households are not accessing food, and people had mixed reaction and they attacked him a bit, and because he was just campaigning. It was a very personal thing for him because he grew up in a very poor household, and he thought it was very important, and it was a very simple single issue, and some of it he also contributed his own money as well, but it's just become very, very politicized, and it's a really meaningful step that can be taken to kind of address these inequalities, but he's being antagonized for it. So I'm not sure that people are fully committed to making changes. And although they've voiced their support, even Minister voiced his support for Black Lives Matter, I'm not sure it's going to really change.
So what you're saying is that the growth in the Eastern European populations is a little bit, or at least competing with, the significance of immigrants, but that Islamophobia still remains a testy issue.
Very briefly, I suspect in 10 years' time, the Eastern European immigrant thing will have ceased to exist
Oh,
when a new generation has come through. Yeah, within one generation, they've gone away. And I might add, I know we're running out of time. I might add, we still have what's been officially classed as an institutionally racist police force in certain parts of the country. The only difference in the UK is they'll hit you with sticks, they don't shoot you because our police don't generally carry guns.
mhm. That would be such a welcome. Well, I don't know. Black guns have guns. People have guns in their home. There are guns everywhere in the United States, and most people would
Sorry,
fight
could you repeat that, please?
Hmm?
Could you repeat your question, please?
I was just talking about trying to weigh things out. The Eastern European influence, and they have a high skill level, you know, in terms of carpentry and electrical work and some of the trades, right? And as their countries don't seem to have recovered, and I mean, I don't know where they were before World War II, but they have flooded Western Europe with skills, right? And like I said earlier, and filled some jobs, they and immigrants that others couldn't or wouldn't do. But then there's Islamophobia, which, see, I mean, that's been around for over a millennia. I don't know if there have been any other attacks in Europe. They've given up in the papers here. The head of Homeland Security said the greatest threat to America are the white supremacist groups. What's the greatest threat that you see over there? Is it Islamophobia? And Andy just told me that the Western immigrant thing will die down. Is it the immigrants? Who's shutting borders? How quickly have they closed? Has the closing been successful? I know that was a lot of questions in one.
It's too many questions. I don't see an answer in the short term to the Islamophobia thing. It's a new bogeyman. I just hope with time. Again, we have a Muslim mayor of London, and we have many Muslim MPs. Most people see the Islamic bogeyman as somebody around the corner, not their own neighbours, who they like and respect and get on with.
Right.
So but I can't answer that.
Okay, Ruby, any thoughts?
I mean, I think in the UK, you know, this ultra nationalism and this kind of, you know, possible breakup of the United Kingdom might be the biggest threat. You know, just destabilizing what was already created as one unit. So just kind of separating out, you know, Scotland voting to be independent, or this issue now with Ireland and Northern Ireland. I think it's really kind of chipping away at the unity, basically.
So
I think that.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's what I feel like is the biggest threat.
So earlier, before we came on, I offered a brush and a comb to your prime minister, but it seems as though he is the English version of our president. True? Not true? Are the English who actually do read papers, and when they're drunk in pubs, I finally found out what a pint was. Are they are more intelligent than the American public? No.
That's the wrong question. Certainly, I think our prime minister's learned from Donald Trump that there's a lack of shame in the new administration that the previous prime minister's administration had. So, for instance, during COVID, his chief advisor was caught doing things that would have been instant resignation. There's now a view of we can brazen it out. Anything that's not liked is just fake news. The one thing we don't have at the moment is partisan news coverage. So people with different views tend to watch the same news channels, which doesn't happen in the US. That's changing. Where America leads, the UK follows. But at the moment, that is keeping some semblance of bipartisan discussion between people. But it's certainly, I'm 55, and I've never seen a more polarized country in this country. Between it's pro and anti-Brexit, and we're the most divided we've ever been.
Yeah, we're experiencing that too. Ruby, let me give you the very last word. But before I do that, I want to ask both of you to be our eyes across the pond. I've gotten more information from the two of you than I've gotten from watching our news, which is kind of restricted. Last word, Ruby.
Just going back to your, similarities between Johnson and Trump, I think their sloppy handling of COVID is another similarity that they have. Mixed messages and U-turns on policy, things like that. I think they've done a similar job. Possibly Trump is leading in terms of his handling of the pandemic, though.
Okay, well, I'm still going to ask you all to join me again. This has been lovely. Even though I didn't have tea, I had a Pepsi. I so appreciate it. Andy, you've been great, although I'm sure you were wondering what the hell I was going to come up with. And I want to thank both of you so much. And if you would stay on after, I'd appreciate it. This has been Critical Talk with Professor Amna Al-Din. This is a program of Muslim Network TV, which I hope you tune into all the programs. Thank you.